Oh, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to continue to have people enter throughout this time. And when we get full, some people will be joining us on a live stream. We've had so much enthusiasm for listening and to one another and hearing from Parker today. And we're just really thrilled about your willingness to join us on this journey. Um, my name is Margaret Golden, and I'm the Education Community Manager at the Greater Good Science Center. And I'm joining you today from Berkeley, California, the original territory of the Chochenyo Ohlone speaking people who are quite active and alive in our world and in our area today. So we really want to honor them and thanking them for um, their participation in our world, bringing us this land that we're so needing to protect together. And along with our very special guest, Parker Palmer, we're also joined today by Amy Eva. And Amy could give a little wave. Amy is our Associate Director at Greater Good Science Center, and she's going to be helping us along the way. And we're honored to have a few other Greater Good Science Center staff in attendance. If any of you want to wave as well and let people know that you're here to help out. We're pleased that you're joining us. If you're just, if any of you want to wave as well and let people know. I'm just getting a little echo there. I'm back now, I think. We've got chat Zoom going on. People, as you enter, please let us know where you're coming from and where you're located. And I'm noticing some friendships starting to form in the room already. So please check out the chat. Looks like we've got a huge international audience. We're so super glad that we can bring this diverse group of people together today. So we're going to be going on a learning journey today, one where we hope you'll find your way forward in these troubling times. The world really needs your courage and compassion right now. And we believe in standing firm with educators to continue to build kinder, happier schools and classrooms where everyone belongs. Before we begin that journey, we'd like to invite Emily, our technology coordinator, to offer us a few tips for navigating this technology together today.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm the Community Support Specialist here at the Greater Good Science Center. I'll be helping with the tech side of things today. Just a few tips as we go into the session. Please try to stay signed into Zoom. If you get kicked off for any reason and we happen to be in a breakout room, please let me know so I can help you rejoin. Please try to keep yourself muted so we can try to minimize noise interference. Raise your hand using the little hand icon at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions or comments to make. Keep your camera on as much as possible so we can try to have a sense of community here. And if you have any tech issues, please feel free to direct message me in the chat.
Thank you so much, Emily. Amy's going to lead us in with some invitations for being together today.
Thank you so much, Margaret. It's so exciting to see everyone and all the exclamation marks too. It seems that we have a good energy in our group. We want to open up this space now and invite you to consider some community invitations that have become a part of our community meetings and our communities of practice. And Parker might recognize some of these because they were inspired by his work and the work for the Center for Courage and Renewal. So these invitations invite you to hold this space together in a kind and inclusive way with us and encourage a sense of belonging, even in a Zoom room. So notice that they're not agreements that you're being asked to comply with, but rather just aspirational ways for us to be together during this time. And so I'm just going to read these four aloud. And the idea here is just to think about which one you want to lean into today, in this moment, in this space. And if you're willing, as I read, you might just type in the chat which one you resonate with and which one might be sort of a learning edge for you today or something you'd like to embrace. So the first one is come as you are. Your thoughts and feelings are welcome here. Bring your doubts, fears, and failings, as well as your convictions, joys, and successes. Be as present as possible. Speak your truth with kindness. Notice what has heart and what has meaning for you. Speak your truth in ways that respect other people's truths by using I statements, and respond to others with curiosity and open questions. Third, listen with compassion. Turn from judgment to wonder and compassionate inquiry. I wonder why they feel or think this way. I wonder what pushed my buttons. Listen without interpreting, correcting, or debating what others say. And then finally, take space and make space. Pay attention to how much and how long you are speaking. Invite other voices. Hold equity of voice as a personal aspiration to create a welcoming and supportive learning community. And that will come up more as we get into small groups that take space and make space, and some time for questions later on in our session together. And I'm just going to look at the chat for a second. I'm seeing listen with compassion, come as you are is speaking to people. I'm seeing please turn up Amy's volume. So I'll turn up my voice here. And then speak your truth with kindness. So all of them are being emphasized here. Thank you. All right. Well, we're leaning into the community invitations, and now we're just going to take just a couple minutes to center ourselves.
Picture up.
Yeah. If you're paying attention to the news, especially here in the United States, you may find all the uncertainty and anxiety is impacting your well-being. And so we want to invite you right now to take a moment to ground yourself with a few deep breaths. So I'm just going to take a quiet moment and invite us all to take a few deep breaths. In through the nose and out through the mouth. Maybe give your shoulders a little roll. Settle into your seat. Bring yourself here now as fully as possible and as honestly as you can. And ask yourself this question: what are you feeling right now? Just breathe into those feelings. There probably are many, without any judgment, without attaching to them or pushing them away. And if you're comfortable sharing, let us know. Like, what are some of the feelings you're having in this moment right now in the chat? And let's just honor them and name them as we move into this discussion. Deep sense of urgency and worry, sadness, overwhelmed, deep sadness, lots of fear and anxiety, hungry, gratitude, curiosity, rage, weary, burnout, gratitude. And the list goes on. Gratitude for a safe, honest space. Thank you all. And now we get to meet Parker Palmer. Margaret's going to introduce us to him and hear from him today. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you, Amy. It sounds like we have a lot of feelings in the room, and we're welcoming them all. We're grateful that you're here and you're bringing your whole self with you. And I'm just delighted to be here with you, Parker. It's an immense pleasure to welcome you to our community. Parker is both a treasured friend and a wise mentor of mine, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for the profound impact you've had on my life with both your personhood and your work. And I'd like to introduce you, Parker, by reading a short synopsis of your many accomplishments. But Emily will pop the longer version into the chat now, because if we stayed with all Parker has done and has been throughout the years, we wouldn't get any time to talk to Parker. So I'll just start by saying Parker is a writer and a speaker and an activist who focuses on issues in education, community, leadership, spirituality, and social change. He's founder and senior partner emeritus of the Center for Courage and Renewal, which supports people in every walk of life in nurturing deep integrity and relational trust for the sake of personal and social transformation. Parker holds a PhD in sociology from the University of California at Berkeley. Go Bears! 14 honorary doctorates and 2 Distinguished Achievement Awards from the National Educational Press Association. Among his honors, he is recipient of the William Rainey Harper Award, previously given to Margaret Mead, Elie Wiesel, and Paulo Freire. That's quite company, my friend. Parker is the author of 10 books, including several award-winning titles that have sold over 2.5 million copies and been translated into 15 languages. Anniversary editions of 3 of his books were issued in 2024, Healing the Heart of Democracy, A Hidden Wholeness, and Let Your Life Speak. And we've heard rumors that a new 30th edition of The Courage to Teach may be arriving soon. Welcome back to Berkeley, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Margaret, for having me here. I'm a great fan of the Greater Good Center and a great fan of yours. So it's a delight to be able to hang out with you again for a while here.
Well, we're super glad you're here. And this is going to start out with a format of us just having a conversation. I've got some questions prepared. But before we begin that, I'd like to invite you to read something that you wrote to us and invite our community to reflect on your words as they join us throughout this time. We're going to put them up on the screen, and I'd love to hear it in your voice, Parker.
Well, thank you. We so often look outside ourselves for the answers to our problems, neglecting the powers we have within us and between us. You and I don't command armies or treasuries, but we have the power of our own integrity and the power of a multiplier called community, powers that have animated great movements and changed the lay and the law of the land. Today, we need to trust those powers to take us where we need to go.
Thank you, Parker. Let's just take a few moments in silence to let that sink in. And if there were any words or phrases or reactions you have to that, I see amen in the chat. I'd love for you to all get a chance to respond with any images or phrases or reactions. Hope, riveting, yes, let's. I feel my belly opening up. And Em, can you put that slide back up for people again so they can see some of those words? Thank you. Power of our own integrity. With that, within us and between us, a multiplier called community. So much richness in this, Parker. I'm excited to be starting this conversation with you, as I feel that this is a really, really right moment where we have many people in our world and in our communities that are afraid and angry and worried as so much uncertainty and so many voices are shouting their bad advice. So, Em, you can take the slide down now. And what I'd like to do is, invite you, Parker, into helping us understand as educators how we might better navigate this heartbreak, these heartbreaking times. I know that you've written a lot about heartbreak, and any words of wisdom to get us started about navigating now?
Well, I think the good news about being human is that the broken, violent world that we live in is not the only world in which we live. We also live in here, in the heart, in a world of inwardness, of human identity and integrity, of self-exploration around questions of meaning and purpose. So when the external world both breaks our hearts and our will to act, we can turn to the world in here, not as a place to escape, but as solid ground on which to stand in the middle of the shifting sands all around us. In solitude and in community, we can do inner work aimed at holding hard experiences in life-giving ways, ways that allow us to get leverage on the external world. What I just said doesn't come from my study of the world's wisdom traditions. It comes from a study I've done over many years of the great liberation movements of the past few centuries. Every democratic movement I've studied begins with oppressed people, people who have been robbed of every form of external power. Those people going inward, getting regrounded in their own identity and integrity, and standing firm in the one source of power that no one can take away from them, the sacredness of their own selfhood. I think they make a transformative decision to refuse to behave outwardly in ways that contradict the truths they hold inwardly. I've called it the decision to live divided no more. It's a powerful decision. It's the ignition moment of so many important transformative movements for social change. And when people like that come together in organized communities of support, multiplying the power of identity and integrity many times over and insisting that the world honor it, we tap into a wellspring of resistance and transformation, a countervailing power that comes from what's within us and what's between us. And I'd simply add in this setting, Margaret, that what I'm talking about here is not only at the heart of social movements, it's also at the heart of education, rightly understood. It goes back to Socrates, who famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And now that I'm in my mid-80s, I feel qualified to add an amendment to Socrates' dictum, which goes like this: if you decide to live an unexamined life, please do not take a job that involves other people, because you're going to do considerable damage. So a liberal education was always meant to illuminate the dynamics of our inner lives, to liberate us from oppression, to prepare us to participate in civic society, the life of a democratic polity, in social responsibility and social change. So the fight to preserve education in the arts and letters and sciences is a critical part of the fight to preserve democracy.
Thank you, Parker. Many of us today, including myself, have been trying to change public educational systems to become more inclusive, life-giving spaces for a very long time. And yet we seem as a culture to be heading backwards in many respects. I'm wondering if you have any wisdom to share that might help us keep our hearts open in the face of what has become such a long and difficult struggle.
Well, put me on the list of people who struggle with all of this. Some days with my heart open, some days with it hard as a rock. At age 86, looking back on a life of commitment to education and democracy, rightly understood, it's really tempting to get cynical about all of the backsliding these days and simply to throw in the towel. But I learned something back in the day that's helped keep me in the struggle during the 1960s in Berkeley, where I got my first lessons in social change. A lot of us felt certain that this was the generation and this was the decade that would set America on a new course. I left Berkeley and I left academic life in 1969 to become a community organizer in Washington, D.C., focused on issues of racial justice. 5 years into that work, it became very clear that the problems I was working on, like white supremacy, were perennial, not seasonal. It also became clear that if I wanted to maintain my commitment to social change, I needed a new frame in which to understand it, a frame with a lot less hubris and a lot more humility than the one that characterized the 60s in Berkeley. I needed a frame rooted in an understanding that the pursuit of values like love, truth, and justice is endless work. It's intergenerational work. That's when I began to understand that human beings always find themselves standing and acting in the tragic gap, the gap between the harsh realities around us on the one hand and what we know to be possible on the other hand, because we've seen it happen from time to time. It's tragic, not just because it's sad, but because it's the result of our flawed nature. It's the result of a flaw in reality itself. The gap that we stand in is not a bug in the nature of things, it's a feature that's been known from the Greeks through the biblical literature on into Shakespeare. And our job is to learn how to stand and act in the tragic gap, to keep putting one foot in front of the other, knowing that the gap will never close once and for all. We're being asked to hold the tension of the gap, refusing to flip out into the cynicism that comes from giving over to life's harsh realities, or the ungrounded idealism that comes from floating above the fray in a world of possibilities. You know, if I were to design a curriculum to prepare social activists, the tragic gap would be lesson number one. And the punchline would be, if you're not willing to spend a lifetime in that gap and keep going despite all the ways you will fall short, you should find a different line of work. I think it helps me, at least, to understand that short-term effectiveness, which this society is so devoted to, cannot be the primary standard by which you live. If you want to work for love, truth, and justice, if you insist on being effective, I know what will happen. You'll take on smaller and smaller tasks because they're the only ones that you can get quick results with. If you want to do deep work for social change, the only standard I know that will help you hold the course day after day is faithfulness. Faithfulness. I mean, faithfulness to your own gifts, faithfulness to opportunities that present themselves where your gifts might help, and faithful to investing yourself where those two converge. There's an old rabbinical saying that I've always loved. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. And the only way I know to live into that saying is by testing yourself regularly on the standard of faithfulness.
Thank you, Parker. As you were describing that, I was thinking all the many teachers who stand in those classrooms every day and leave the room sometimes disheartened and do what they need in the interim before they come back so that they can come back with an open heart, a forgiving heart, a wondering heart, and a loving heart so that their students can continue to grow and learn from them. So I'm deeply grateful for that vision of the tragic gap. And I know that you, in your classic book, you wrote The Courage to Teach, which you talked about who is the self that teaches. And in my role as a teacher educator, I introduced that concept to so many students and that text, and they were so blown away by your words. Many of them wrote to you. I said, well, write to him and tell him how this has saved you. And I'm wondering, in that you've talked so much about the so many things about how you stand in that gap, how it matters, how you stand there. So, what about that book do you think really resonated with teachers?
Hmm. Well, first I have to say that your kind word classic makes me feel really, really old. So, but maybe we can hold off on that for a while. Um, I'm sure that readers, teachers could answer your question better than I can. But I can say this, when I wrote the book, I was not thinking about how to reach teachers. I simply wanted to write something that was faithful to my own experience as a teacher. With every book I've written, the publishers, marketing people say or ask, who are you writing to so we can pitch the book to them? And I've always said, I can't answer that question. All I can tell you is where I'm writing from. And that's from a place of authenticity as best I can reach it. So I wrote about teaching as I experienced it within myself, an experience that has always been laced with two things, a strong sense of calling and a big dose of fear. I think the title resonated very quickly with teachers because unless you are phoning it in, you teach from a place of caring about your students, caring about your subject, caring about how to bring all of this into creative interaction in a very challenging world. You're wearing your heart on your sleeve. So good teaching makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability takes courage, especially in a culture of fear, such as the one that permeates education way too often. So I think good teachers felt recognized by the title, perhaps, and I think the subtitle resonated as well, exploring the inner landscape of a teacher's life. The book is a humanistic approach to teaching, in contrast to the mechanistic approach so often taken by the focus on tips, tricks, and techniques. Good teaching can never be reduced to technique. Good teaching comes from the identity and integrity of the teacher and from his or her capacity for connectedness. A good teacher is an organic node that holds together a complex weave of teachers, students, and subjects with all kinds of tension involved and all kinds of creative possibilities. I'll say this, Margaret, the finest compliment I ever got about the book came when I started doing retreats based on it for K through 12 teachers. At the end of one retreat, one teacher came up to me and said, this is the first time in 20 years of teaching that I've been treated organically as a plant to be nurtured and grown rather than as a broken machine to be fixed. So one thing is really, really clear to me about education reform. At the heart of the enterprise, we must have proper regard, respect, really, for teachers, and we must find ways to support their inner development as it impacts the practice of teaching. If we can't do that, we will never have a system in which both teachers and students will thrive. And if the system refuses to provide us with that support, we must find ways outside of the system to support each other.
So here we are. That's what we're about today, Parker, is bringing together educators outside of the systems that they must walk back into so that they can create some kind of community of congruence together so that they can be in community in a way that they can bring that strength back into when they are alone. We're also trying to create a program called Greater Good Schools, where we're trying to bring together educators who are on this mission together, but they also work together, and so that they can create something on the ground where they're going. So I think it's so important what you're saying about this idea that vulnerability is at the heart of authenticity, and therefore all teachers, if they're going to be authentic, because kids read them. Even the littlest ones can tell, right, when a teacher's real, like the Velveteen Rabbit, I like to think.
Exactly.
Uh, and it's so lovely that we can come together in support of one another to do that. I'm wondering about that because that requires us to be both strong and vulnerable, and strong and sad, and bring all that we have as teachers into the classroom so that our students can be seen whole too. Can you talk for a little bit about, or what advice would you give to educators to kind of live, as you've termed it, divided no more, so that they can be, um, their wholeness can be with them as they go, and they don't have to be shutting something down, um, so that they can fit within the box of what they're being asked to do?
Well, as you know, Margaret, I'm not big on advice, but what I can do is I can talk about my own experience. For me, wholeness has nothing to do with perfection. Instead, it means embracing my brokenness as an integral part of my life. You know, we live in broken times, and that leaves us feeling broken as well. And in my work with teachers over the years, I've found that so many of us are plagued by a sense of not being enough. You know, I just don't have what it takes to meet the demand. But the demands of teaching are endless and they're bottomless, more so today than ever before. And I could spend my life beating myself up about the students I failed to reach or the systems I failed to reform. But if I refuse to do the inner work required to integrate all of that shadow side stuff into my sense of self, I disempower myself. And sooner or later, it will take me down. You know, for me, as I've written, this has really been an existential issue related to my 3 deep dives into clinical depression. Liberation from that darkness came when I was finally able to say, I am all of the above. I am my gifts and my achievements, and I am the part of me that sometimes stands on the edge of a precipice and starts slipping into it. Showing up in the world as we truly are is a source of strength and courage, I think, since we're no longer spending energy trying to hide out. And it turns out that when we are willing to be vulnerable with a fuller array of our own truth, we connect more deeply with others in the community that we all need to sustain us. And that includes our students. From my study of social movements, I've been able to ask, what is it that keeps us from showing up with our whole truth, from speaking truth to power? And I think the answer is very simple. It's the knowledge that we are likely to be punished in some way if we show up as who we really are and with what we really believe. So I've found in these movements that the courage to live divided no more, and this is aspirational for me, that courage comes from people who have transformed the logic of punishment in their own understanding. They understand, and these words have become very important to me, that no punishment anybody could lay on us could possibly be worse than the punishment we lay on ourselves by conspiring in our own diminishment. Conspiring in our own diminishment. By living a divided life, by acting and speaking on the outside in ways that are not congruent with what we know to be true on the inside. And I'll just say finally that these days at age 86, when you think about your mortality more than you did at 26, 36, or 46, There's one more motivator for me to live divided no more. I can't think of a sadder way to die than with the realization that I never showed up in the world with who I truly am and what I truly believe and what I truly care about and what I truly hope for. Standing for all that I value and love and standing against all that threatens it.
Well, I have to say, Parker, every time I hear you speak about that, it reminds me so deeply why I wanted to be a teacher and what it took to stay in this, um, and the joy that comes from being my authentic self as well. Um, Once, a few years back, you gave a keynote address to a conference on spirituality and education at Naropa University. And they subsequently published it as an essay entitled The Grace of Great Things. And Emily's going to pop that essay in the chat for others to take with them as they go. And the subtitle was Reclaiming the Sacred in Knowing, Teaching, and Learning. To this day, it is one of my favorite things that you've written, and such important teaching for us now, I believe. And towards the end, you wrote, the sacred is something we carry in our hearts into the world, in solitude and in community. Can you explain what you meant by, or you mean by the sacred, and how educators can continue to carry that into their schools, classrooms, and communities?
I'll give it a try, Margaret. I'll give it a try. Let me give it a little context. In the book, I define the inner life as having three dimensions: intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And my definition of spirituality is any way a person has to answer the eternal human yearning to be connected with something larger than one's own ego. So, something that can save us from the loneliness of self-absorption, something that can give us a sense of meaning and purpose. I like this definition of the spiritual because it's value neutral. It embraces all of the world's wisdom traditions, including secular humanism at their best, and it embraces collective movements like the Third Reich that cause people to lose their identity and integrity and commit egregious evil. All of this falls under the heading of spirituality. In that context, sacred means, to me, that which we find worthy of respect, which leads directly to the question, what are we teaching our students about what's worthy of their respect? Or about what will answer their yearning to be connected with something that will give them a sense of meaning and purpose? You know, as I look around the US today, and I know I'm not alone in this, what I see is pretty clearly the continuing decline of our democracy and the rise of something that looks a lot to me like early stage fascism. So I have a lot of questions about education and about all of our civic enterprises and what they are or aren't doing to push against this. I think one of the things we owe our students is some basic tools of discernment to come up with life-giving answers to their spiritual yearnings. I'm irrevocably opposed to any form of indoctrination in the classroom, but I'm equally opposed to any form of education that ignores the quest for meaning and purpose and ignores the tools of discernment that can help people make considered choices.
Hmm. I hear you, Parker. I'm really hoping that one of the things that we're trying to do in our work at Greater Good is to bring back that sense of meaning and purpose into education, both for our teachers and educators and for the students that they serve. One of the things we've been focusing on recently is the science of intellectual humility and how we practice this virtue can, among other things, we've found, improve relationships and help us to be more tolerant and bridge our divides. And in that same keynote, you spoke about recovering the humility that makes real knowing, teaching, and learning possible. Can you talk a little bit about the humility that you were describing there?
I know we're running short on time, Margaret, and if I were really humble, I'd just shut up right now and let the rest of the program unfold. But I'll try to be quick about this. I don't see how there can be an authentic life of the mind without intellectual humility. The humility to say, I don't have all the answers. The humility that comes from finding yourself in the presence of what Rainer Maria Rilke called the grace of great things like those that are studied in all of the disciplines of the curriculum. A good scholar, I think, is a good listener and a good observer. How can you be either of those things without the humility that asks you to listen more than tell and to observe more than impose your will? I think a big outstanding question of education is whether we can treat each other with the same respect that a scholar gives to his or her subject. It's often struck me as rather ironic, to say the least, that scholars who listen well to their subjects and observe with care have a really hard time doing that with each other as fellow faculty.
Yeah, we've heard from teachers a lot when talking about these virtues that it's a lot harder to do it with the other faculty than with their students. So really creating that kind of relationality and trust in the school itself is going to be really important for teachers to be able to continue that in their own classrooms.
Yeah.
And being humble allows us to keep learning, I'd say. And if one educational dictum that I've heard so often is that good teachers are lifelong learners. So that requires humility for sure. So, Parker, I'd just like to end before we go to questions from the audience by lifting up this relationship that you have with the Center for Courage and Renewal that you founded with Rick and Marcy Jackson back in 1997. The tagline now is to nurture deep integrity and relational trust, building the foundation for a more loving, equitable, and healthy world. And I've heard you say many times that the center is how wheels were put under your ideas or your ideas were given them. Can you talk about a little bit about how the center has done that and how our audience might partake in discovering more of your ideas there?
Yeah, well, the wheels that the center put on are not only on my ideas, but a lot of other good people, including those of Marcy Jackson and Rick Jackson, two of the best friends and colleagues anyone ever had. So many, many thanks to them for all they did in the early years to grow the center. And today it's thriving 30 years after founding with several hundred trained facilitators who offer longer and short-term retreat programs and other kinds of programming, not only around this country, but around the world. And again, knowing that we're short on time, I'll just encourage people to hop online at www.couragerenewal.org and check out the offerings. Facilitators, as I said, all around the world, eager to work with folks in every walk of life, already doing a lot of work with teachers, with folks in healthcare, with nonprofit leaders, with clergy, with young social change activists, with citizens just trying to find out how to be a good citizen in times like these. For me, it's just been such a life-enhancing line of work, and it's surrounded me with such an amazing community that I'm ever grateful for it. The link is www.couragerenewal.org.
Thank you, Parker. And Amy just popped in a link as well, and a little verbiage there. So we're so appreciative, Parker. We want to give a little time for the audience to ask a couple questions. And I see one hand raised at the moment. And I'm having trouble though on this screen. Okay, I got that there. It's is it Chess? Chess, you've got your
Yes,
hand raised?
thank you. If, or I should say, since we are lifelong learners, I would like to invite Mr. Parker to be open to our new administration. I have been pleasantly surprised. I didn't vote for him, and I campaigned strongly against him in 2016 or thereabouts when he first came on board. But through some miracle, because it is miraculous, I have been changed in many ways. And I have been renewed. And I feel hopeful. And I've seen some really good things. And I invite you to please be open.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chess. Any other questions for Parker?
Margaret, there's one in the Q&A.
Okay, let's see.
I'll I read it, or can you see
Yeah,
it?
please, Amy. I'm struggling with all the words.
How can community members support the teachers trying to do their work in the most authentic way possible? So how can community members support authentic work? How can we educate the public in these divisive times? All very simple questions to answer, Parker.
Right, as they all are.
You're right.
Well, I'll say that step number one is get to know the teachers.
Mm.
Let them answer the question. Ask them what they need that you might help with. Ask them what kinds of support would be most useful to them. I have found over the years that their answers vary widely. It depends on the circumstances and the situation. They range all the way from showing up in class to help young kids enjoy reading and learn to read, to attending school board meetings and promoting positions that would be more supportive of teachers. So I'd say go to the teachers first, and take your answers there.
Thank you, Parker. We have time for two more quick questions, and we'll go to Pat.
Hi, Margaret. Hi, Parker. Thank you so much for hosting this. It's so lovely to hear both of you. My big question is, in these times when I know how important it is to be authentic, when it becomes scary to be a person who is living in some of those communities that are so abused right now, like just it's the easiest word to say, the trans kids, immigrants, who are all in our schools, and it's hard for them to show up authentically. I know in Pennsylvania, lots of kids are retreating to cyber schools, and I know standing in that tragic gap and hanging on is one of the most important things we can do. Can you speak to that at all, Parker? Because I think you've been through other tumultuous times that might guide us as educators.
Well, I appreciate you naming that fact, because my feelings about the current administration, my thoughts about the current administration hinge very directly on people being damaged, sometimes mortally damaged by their actions. And of course, there are forms of courage that very few young people are able to adopt or embody at this tender developmental stage of their lives. So I think it's a lot about companioning those young people, advocating for those young people as adults who can stand up once we understand that no punishment anybody might lay on us could possibly be greater than the punishment that comes from conspiring in our own diminishment. So if I have a truth to tell about the injuries being done to trans kids, to other members of the LGBTQ plus community, to immigrants who are seeking a better life, even to asylum seekers, I need to stand up and tell that to the people who might be able to hear it, accompany them, befriend them on what has to be an enormously crushing journey that so many folks are taking right now.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Pat. Mukta, you've got the last word.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Parker, and thank you for really hosting this. It's much needed. As a medical educator, where healthcare in itself has gone from being a vocation to being one of a corporate business entity, my question, Parker, for you is, we still host the strategic lead retreats that are named after you. So thank you for that. And we gather educators, and they have been so well received that we have now started hosting and facilitating these for non-awardees also. So my question is, as we are facing this, what I call moral injury that we see from the external environment that is imposed not just on our patients and the community, but on ourselves, what advice would you give us as we try to stand with courage ourselves, but also give hope and meaning and purpose to the other educators as we facilitate these retreats?
Well, Mukta, let me start out by thanking you for your long service to your colleagues in healthcare, and especially for these retreats, some of which I imagine are being done in association with the ACGME, the Accrediting Commission for Graduate Medical Education. And to me, that's been one of the most important streams of our work that's now gone on for 15 years, and you've been involved in a lot of that. You know, all I can say as one who's not on those particular front lines is keep on doing the work. And if there are ways that the center can support and sustain those of you who are working with folks in healthcare, please let the center know. We would be eager, they would be eager, the staff there would be eager to offer any kind of support they can. So good to hear your voice. Thank you for your good work, and keep on keeping on.
Thank you, Parker.
Thank
As
you.
you can see, thank you, Mukta, for your question and your work. As you can see, we have a lot of people engaging in the chat around what's been offered here tonight, lifting up one another, supporting one another. And I think at this time, it's something that we need to do so that we have the courage to stand up and bring our whole selves so that we can protect the most vulnerable around us as well. So we'd like to now, as we do each time we meet, move into an opportunity for you to plumb some of these ideas yourself. Bring your own stories into this. And the way that we'd like to do it is the way that Parker has taught us to do it, through a third thing and the wisdom of the grace of great things. And we've got a great thing here, which is a poem. And we've invited Parker to read this poem for us and then offer some questions for us. And we'll be diving into some breakout rooms and we'll give a little instructions on that in a moment. Parker?
Yeah. Will the questions be up on a slide as well, Margaret?
Yes, we'll
Okay.
have the questions are on the slide and we'll have them in the breakout rooms for people to see as well in the chat.
That's great. So the poem is The Wild Geese by Wendell Berry. Horseback on Sunday morning, harvest over, we taste persimmon and wild grape, sharp sweet of summer's end. In time's maze over fall fields, we name names that went west from here, names that rest on graves. We open a persimmon seed to find the tree that stands in promise, pale in the seed's marrow. Geese appear high over us, pass, and the sky closes. Abandon, as in love or sleep, holds them to their way. Clear in the ancient faith, what we need is here. And we pray, not for new earth or heaven, but to be quiet in heart and in eye clear. What we need is here. And so, with that lovely, lovely poem in the back of our minds and hearts, 4 questions that might help you open it up a bit for yourself or whatever question comes to you in the small groups. Number 1, what are you doing or might you do to remain quiet in heart and in eye clear, to help you see that what we need is here within us and between us? Secondly, what names that rest on graves have particular importance for or meaning for you? What conversation would you like to have with the ancestors or with history that would help strengthen you? Third, you can't change the world, but you can change whatever is within 3 feet or so. Who or what is within 3 feet of where you live and work, figuratively or literally? What changes would you like to make in the dynamics of that space? And 4, creating change in the larger venues of life is never a solo act. How well connected are you with a community that has a chance to multiply the power of one many times over? What might you do to create or deepen that connection?
Thank you for these beautiful questions, Parker. Amy, thank you for, or Emily or Amy, whoever did, thank you for putting them in the chat. They're in there. Thank you, Emily, at about the 427 mark. And then the poem is also in there for you to read again if you'd like to before you think about these questions. And we want to give you, while we're going to be putting you in some breakout rooms, and we don't want you to be afraid. We always have drop off here. People are afraid to talk to one another, but it really takes courage for us to be vulnerable with our thoughts and feelings with one another and to listen with an open mind and an open heart. So, Amy, did you want to bring us into explaining our small group connection piece?
Sure, everybody, as you're comfortable, we want to invite you to about a 15-minute breakout group right now. We're going to put you in groups of 4 to 5 max, and you'll each have a couple of minutes to share. With these questions, you might want to choose perhaps one to respond to and share with your group. And choose one, and then we will shift every 3 minutes or so. Depending on the number in your group, you each have about 3 minutes to share with one another and respond as you feel able to one of these questions. So about 15 minutes, about 3 minutes per person, and just invite you to lean in and share with one another. We have our own global community of educators, and people really often benefit a lot from just taking time to check in with people across the world in this way. So thank you, Parker, for the poem. Thank you for the questions. And we are going to have you join groups of 4 or 5 and take a few minutes to share.
Thank you, Amy.
Well, welcome back, everyone. You got to hear the end of Parker Palmer reading a poem to us as we were waiting for you to come back, and it was Rembrandt Late Self-Portraits by
Elizabeth Jennings, yeah.
We were asking him for a poem that would celebrate or inspire humility. So there you go. I just want to welcome you all back, and we have Margaret. Do we have 5 minutes maybe for a little bit of group debrief?
Yeah, 5 minutes, Amy.
Okay, so this is a time for us to share any insights in our small groups or additional questions we might have, thoughts, ideas, insights, questions, and just feel free to raise your hand, and we can call on you, or you're welcome to post in the chat, and just a little time together before we close. Okay, John, I see John first, and Alan or Elaine, I don't know how to pronounce your name properly. John, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I'm trying to lower my hand here. Okay. I think just the idea, I had a wonderful conversation. I was only in a dyad, so we really had a time to really dig deep. But my colleague talked about in the book Hope for Cynics that 85% of us, conservatives, liberals, whatever, are in agreement on major issues. 85% on the issues we agree upon. There's a lot of commonality, and maybe staying off of the entertainment industry that used to be news that divides us, and start looking for our commonalities in other venues we can pull together.
Thank you. All right, Alan?
Yes, Alain, I'm in our little group, we talked quite a bit about the importance of the sacred that was mentioned several times, and by Parker. And in fact, the sacred, the sense of the mystery, and that's very important to induce humility and vulnerability. So, and that is, to me, I'm part of a small group trying to think of how could education be transformed in the U.S. or beyond, and to restore that sense of the mystery and the sacred is so important. So thank you very much, Parker, for underlining that.
Thank you.
Danielle, would you like to comment?
I was muted. Okay, got it. We had a wonderful breakout session, and one of the things that stuck with me was this idea of how we show up in the world when we have a broken heart. And that has been one of my goals this year. I'm a 11th grade English teacher, and one of the people in my group added on, showing up the best that we can with compassion and with gentleness, and leaning into like living in that tragic gap, right? I think my whole life I thought that like being in that gap, that something was wrong, that I was failing in some way. And so it was just revolutionary to hear that is just where we're supposed to live and hold that tension. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Danielle. I'll just add a little footnote in the retreats that we do with young social activists. They will often name the tragic gap as one of the most important things they were invited to reflect on and enter into, in just the way you spoke about it. That it changes from being a bug in reality to a feature of reality, and it reframes their struggles in some creative ways. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Kate, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, thank you. In my group, we talked a little bit about just the names that rest on graves, and those who have come before us, who have done this work, and have continued to do this work. My answer to number one was very jumbled. What are we doing? You know, like, what are these practices? And I think, like, hearing my group talk, part of my practice needs to be the memory of those who have come before and have done this work and have dedicated their lives to, and I love how you put it, Parker, just that it's perennial. This is lasting, and it doesn't mean that our work isn't worth it, even if we don't see the flower bloom right now. And so I think that's very encouraging to me. I also teach junior and senior English, and the literature that I'm reading becomes a balm to my spirit, and thinking about how we can use art and poetry and writing and literature just as a way to remind ourselves, like, people have been fighting this fight for a long time, and we're not the first and we won't be the last, but our work matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. That's so affirming for so many people, I think, to embrace that. Thank you.
Well said. And Stu, it's so nice to see you. We've worked together before. We have a question or a comment?
Yes, good to be here. Thank you, Amy. And first, I just want to thank you, Parker, not just for today, but for your life's work and all that you've given to so many of us. And I was very struck inside of our group. And what came to me was the title of your book, The Courage to Teach. That now's the time of courage to stand. One of our members talked about where books can't be used, that she loves to introduce her kids in terms of equity and diversity, and the courage to, what can I do, even if the forces say otherwise? And it made me think of the phrase out of the poem, what we need is here. So rather than this time is of craziness and discouragement, it's a time of great opportunity to bring all that we can forward. So I'm encouraged and just very grateful that we could be together as a community. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Stu. I agree with you about the evocative and provocative potentials of this time, and it is bringing out a lot of life-giving creativity in people.
I think, do we have time for Kay, Margaret, and everyone, or do we need to shift? Oh, you're on mute. You're still on mute. I do know, Kate, that there was a question before you all went into breakout rooms. I hate doing this as a facilitator. And a lot of folks asked if Parker would be willing, before that we end today, if he would be willing to share if there were one practice he would recommend for us that would cultivate courage in this time, what would he recommend? And I know he had a chance to think about that for about 2 minutes, but Parker, would you like to weigh in on that?
I'll call the privileges of age here and give two answers to a question about one thing. And the first thing is silence. Just for me, always necessary to let the water settle and see what's in there, what's in my heart, what's in my mind, before I get caught up in the frenzy of the day or the moment or whatever it may be. And the second, taking with me into the silence poetry, which I always think of as the very finest words to come out of silence. Poets really know how to tap into silence for the words that they find there when the water has settled. So I don't know what I would do without Mary Oliver and William Stafford and Marge Piercy and William Butler Yeats and a whole bunch of other people who continually walk around and into the themes we've been talking about tonight.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all so much. And we're so happy that you could all join us. We hope that you're taking something away with you. I know I certainly am. And I just want to say, let's give a little love to Parker and to one another in any way that works with you. I'm going to fill my screen with hearts and deep gratitude to you, my friend Parker, for joining us.
Thank you.
And if you want to unmute yourself or write in the chat, I just want to give you the opportunity to speak and those words, just a moment of love.
Thank you, Parker. Thank you, Greater Good.
Yeah,
so
Thanks,
grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
Thank
Parker.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
You,
you.
Angela.
Thank you.
Bye. True
Thank
blessing.
Thanks to everybody.
Thank you,
What a
everyone.
great meeting. Thank you.
Well,
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
we'd like to
It's so
thank
good
you
to hear
all.
all the
Thank you,
people, the
Parker.
voices. Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thank
Parker.
you.
Merci
We'd
beaucoup.
like to end
Yes.
with a quote
Thank you.
by Julian Agwan, who is a indigenous human rights lawyer. And he writes in his voice, "No offering is too small, no stone unneeded. All of us, without exception, are qualified to participate in the rescue of the world."
Mhm.
So I'm going to pass it over to our fearless leader, Vicky Zakshwefsky,
Mhm.
who is going to tell us what's next and ask for your feedback. Vicky?
Thanks, Margaret. And I just want to offer my deepest gratitude to Parker and to everybody who came to this meeting today. There is so much power in community, and I know my heart feels much more settled after this hour and a half. So thank you. So you're going to be hearing from us via email with lots of additional resources for you and your school communities and more opportunities to stay engaged with us. Next month, we're going to have Professor Sherry Watt, Iris Pullman, and Gordon Louie of the Being Institute to explore how we can create educational communities that courageously face complex social challenges while fostering trust, collaboration, and dialogue. So we hope that this experience has benefited you personally, given you some ideas to take back what you've learned. And we have a short survey, if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple minutes to fill that out and sharing that. That helps us to know what will be most helpful to this community. So thank you so much, and wish you all very well. And please do stay in touch with us.
We'll play some
Thank you,
music
folks.
for you too. Well, if you stay and do the survey, and feel free to stay on for a couple more minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the resources. And next month, having another one.
Every month, every month.